Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see you this evening for this short webinar where we are going to talk about the difference between banter and bullying. So just a little bit about me. My name is David and I am an LGBTQ plus education consultant, and I work with schools to ensure that their curriculum and policies and therefore the school culture is as LGBT inclusive as possible. And that's working with primary and secondary schools. So I just want to go over the outline for today. We're going to cover four key terms, and hopefully some of this is familiar to you already. We're going to go over the key LGBTQIA plus terms, going to think about what we mean by bullying and banter. Then we'll move on to thinking about the impact of discriminatory language and then how we can make a change in our school for the better. So I always like to start my sessions by just saying that this is a safe space. Please feel that there's no judgment. We're all here to learn. So please do ask those questions and raise those comments if we go through. Please do raise your hand or save it for the end. I will not record the questions at the end, so that bit will be, won't be part of the recording. Okay, so you can see quite a few words on the screen there. I'd like you just spend a minute or two just thinking about which ones are you confident with for the definitions and which ones are you really unsure of. So pop it into the chat, let me know. And then we'll go through them. Okay, yeah, so some really interesting ones there. So we're quite confident in the words such as gay, lesbian, the ones that are more common. It's the ones such as aromantic, asexual, and kind of the difference sometimes between pansexual and bisexual kind of comes up a bit. Brilliant. Yeah, so let's have a look at the definitions. As I said, this is being recorded, so you will get the definitions on the slide, so you can always pause it back if you want to have a look. So as we were just saying then, so aromantic is a person who does not experience romantic attraction. Asexual is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction. My background as a primary teacher is more around science education. So the one asexual for me is always that one about remembering that there's no sexual intercourse as such, if you like, that is needed. So that's how I kind of remember asexual from that science perspective, if that helps you. Cisgender is a word used for someone whose gender identity is the same as the sex they were assigned at birth. So I identify as cisgender. I was born male and I still identify as male. So trans then, the one we can see down here at the bottom, is that term, umbrella term for people whose gender is not the same or doesn't sit comfortably with the sex they were assigned at birth. So hopefully that gives you some kind of definition. This list has been taken from the Stonewall website. You can see the link at the bottom there, and they have a lot more on there that might be something you want to look at if you're unsure on any. So when we think about bullying, and I'm using the Anti-Bullying Alliance definition for the benefit of this session, not only because next week is Anti-Bullying Week. So they define it as the repetitive and intentional hurting of one person or group by another person or group where the relationship involves an imbalance of power. And of course, as many of us know, bullying can be physical, verbal, or psychological. And the important thing to remember, especially when we think about banter in the next slide, is that it can happen face to face or online. So hopefully that is something we're all quite familiar with as a definition as bullying. But when we think about banter, it's actually quite a woolly term to define and simply kind of to pin down because of how everybody uses it. But the Anti-Bullying Alliance define banter as the playful and friendly exchange of teasing remarks. So when we think about the elements of bullying, it kind of really links in then with banter. So this is where it kind of gets a bit blurry, really. But it's vital to knowing whether something is bullying, intentional, hurtful, repetitive, and involves a power balance. And if it does, then it would be considered to be bullying. And the thing with banter is just because you think something is banter or a joke, something is playful or that friendly exchange or teasing remarks, doesn't mean other people will. So we always need to be mindful about how other people may receive the comments that are made. And certainly sometimes it's not within our friendship groups where the banter can cause offense, but it's when there are other parties that are involved. So particularly online, if comments are made and it could seem like banter, but if someone else then reads that it may not be interpreted in the same way. So it's really important to be aware of our audience when we think about the comments we make. So to kind of try and get our head around it a bit, I've got some comments which I'm going to go through, and I want you just to type in the chats as we go through each one, whether you think they're bullying or banter. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. I mean, I have my idea about which I think is right and which one I think is wrong, or which one is bullying, sorry, which one I think is banter. But your opinion may well differ. And of course, that's all down to what we find funny and everything like that, and whether we think it's hurtful. So there's no such thing as bi, it's just laziness. Now, for those of you who are avid Gimme, 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 the TV show fans, this is a quote from that. Bullying or banter? Yeah, interesting. So in the context of the TV show, this is actually said as a bit of banter between Linda Hughes, who is a straight female cisgender woman in the TV show, and then saying it to her friend Tom, who is gay in the series. Of course, it was said as a joke back in the late 90s, but now we think about it, and there's a lot of discussion at the moment around the erasure of being bi, and how often within the LGBTQ plus community being bisexual is kind of not discussed as much. For someone in that position, that could actually be seen as being harmful. So that's, yeah, it's a grey area. It's not quite as easy to define as you might think. Okay, what about this one? And I've heard this plenty of times between staff in schools. It doesn't matter that you're a lesbian. Is that bullying or is it banter? Yeah, again, so often, so we're not quite sure on that one, but this would definitely come under the bullying aspect. And I'll explain why in a minute, more than banter. Often it doesn't come from a place of intentional harm. There's no one ever really says it to cause offense. But often when you use words like this, it's almost like you're trying to say that being a lesbian, because it doesn't matter, it's almost like it's not relevant. Actually, somebody's lived experiences of being a lesbian are important to their identity. So that's why that one can come in there. I'm not transphobic. I've got trans friends. Again, I'm sure many of us have heard that line or similar lines to that. Is that bullying, banter? What are our thoughts? Yeah, okay, perfect. So definitely some interesting views on that one. So these are some jokes that are, banded around. What do you call a gay dentist? A tooth fairy. Yeah, so some quite harmful banter in a sense. If you're, if I was saying that to one of my friends, it would be, I'd consider that a bit of banter potentially. But and if that is someone, and you consider the audience and someone else who may look at that, they may really take offense by that, because it's that use of the word fairy to describe the somebody who is gay. The next one, who's the boy girl in the relationship? And you hear this loads and loads in relation to same-sex couples. And again, often not meant with intent and not meant to offend somebody, but certainly I've been asked that question and it does kind of hurt a little bit. It's like, well, why does there have to be a boy or a girl? Why does it have to conform to that heteronormative nature of what a relationship is? And then the last two on there, you don't even look gay. Something that happens quite a lot, really, in that concept of, well, we have this stereotypical idea really about what we think it means to be gay, and we don't look gay. You sure you are? And then the last one, which is actually a quote from Sex and the City. I'm not even sure bisexuality exists. I think it's just a layover on the way to gay town. So again, that erasure of being bi. Now, when you take each of those as an individual, it's easy to say actually they're not that harmful. They wouldn't really upset anybody that much. But where we need to go really careful is thinking about, well, if it's not intentional, then is it actually discrimination? Is it discriminatory? Is it considered bullying? So you can argue that most of those statements, if not all of them, are discriminatory, even though they're not intentional, and they're what we call microaggressions. So microaggressions are those everyday slights, snubs, insults, which communicate on a really subtle level that hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to members of a marginalized group. So in the context of the LGBT LGBTQ plus community by hearing things like who's the boy, who's the girl in the relationship, or I can't be homophobic, I've got gay friends. They're small things, but it's almost like they are dismissing or trying to erase through nobody's intentions really what it's like to be part of the LGBTQ plus community. So when we consider that in school, then it is worth just being aware that if a child or a member of staff comes to us and they feel like they're being bullied and the comments they're coming up with are similar and mirror what we've just looked at in relation to bullying and banter, that we do really look at that and think, actually, this is something that is underlying homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic that we really do need to look at and look at how we educate people in the language they're using. So a few statistics around bullying then, and this is taken from Just Like Us, who did their survey in 2023. They've also got another report they did in 2021. And in the last year, LGBT plus young people are more likely to be bullied at school. So LGBT young people, 68% have been bullied versus 47% of non-LGBT young people. So you can see there's a real increase there in the bullying that's likely to happen in schools. And also when Just Like Us surveyed the young people and they spoke to them about when do they wish they'd learned about it, many of them said they wished that they'd learned about being LGBT in primary school because it just helps build that more positive narrative. But what's really interesting, and this one always sticks with me, is that less than half, only 44% of LGBT respondents said their school spoke positively about LGBT plus people. So if we combat those microaggressions, if we combat that language that can be perceived as bullying or banter, then our LGBTQ plus young people are going to have a more positive time in school. So kind of to end the session, as I said, it's only a short 20-minute one this evening, thinking about what we can do in school. So again, this pulls on the report from Just Like Us to give us some ideas. They said that in the more supportive schools, 84% of young people were optimistic about their future. So there's a real impact we can have on our children. So when we think about what we can put in place when we hear that language, make sure that you have systems for logging it. So whether that is whatever behavior system you have in your school, make sure that you have a system for logging it and logging it where you can as homophobic or biphobic incidents. And if you really can, have transphobic incidents as a separate. I know some schools will use a category as just discriminatory language. Some will have racist language in there as a separate one. Some will have homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic linked in together. So it's really important you've got that, because then it means that the school leadership team can really have a look at that and consider how many instances there really are that are happening in school. But it's also about being able to challenge it with confidence. And I know this is something that staff can really struggle with. So there's that whole concept about the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And this is a quote from David Morrison, who was chief of the Australian Army. And it's one that I think is really important. If we walk past a comment in our school corridors or in the playground and we hear a child using a homophobic slur and they're using it as banter, actually, if you're not comfortable with that, I think it's really important that we challenge that and say that language is not acceptable in our school. And we have those restorative conversations with our children. Interestingly, and this is the 2021 study by Just Like Us, only 30% of LGBT plus pupils think that homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic bullying is taken seriously at their school. So that's why it's crucial that we really understand what we mean by bullying and that language that is homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic, and how we put that into place. But what comes out, and this is a report from Diversity Role Models, is that actually teachers tell them that they lack confidence to talk generally about diversity, and that fear of saying the wrong thing, or that worry about support from the wider community. So to help with that, one of the resources I've got on my website, and I will send a link around for you all as well, is having a script that you can share with staff. So there's a common approach. So when you hear an example of homophobic language, for example, or there's a comment that a child thinks is banter, but is perceived not to be, it's about following that consistent approach. So you can see on the image on the screen there, thinking about establishing understanding, explaining meaning, using empathy, challenge the comment directly, and then link that back to your school ethos and your school policy. Of course, once you've done that once, if it carries on, then you might want to look at your behavior policy and where you take that next. But I think in the first instance, it's really important that we go through, we go through that restorative approach with our children. So apologies, that was a super short whistle-stop tour of banter and bullying. I hope that has been useful for you. I'm going to stop the recording now. So if anyone has any questions, they can ask them to me.